Hi, you're listening to Coefficient, a brand new podcast series brought to you by TheMathCompany. And I'm your host, Nirupama, a journalist, researcher, and podcaster, currently the content lead for thought leadership and podcasts here at MathCo. In every episode of Coefficient, we deep dive into compelling topics related to the present and future of data analytics and AI for business intelligence. This is episode 5, and today we're talking about upgrading your revenue growth management toolkit. Revenue growth management, or RGM, refers to the capabilities and strategies that large companies use to drive their growth. That is, increase their sales, increase their profit margins, or their market share for particular products at certain times and in certain markets. So we're talking about sustained growth here, sustainable growth here, rather than, just investing in and doing everything everywhere all at once. So this is, making strategic decisions on pricing and informed investments on promotion and marketing. This is crucial for companies trying to survive and be successful in dynamic markets with lots of competition, new products to deal with, and customer demand fluctuating wildly. RGM is often understood in terms of the growth levers that the solutions try to target. We spoke about pricing and promotion. In addition to that, there's assortment and distribution, trade investments, and a few others. Now, all companies have some sort of an RGM toolkit or solution in place, but to be competitive and successful in today's market, that's simply not enough, which is why it is time to upgrade your RGM toolkit. How does that work? That's exactly what we'll be discussing in today's episode. Our guests today are leaders of the RGM capability here at MathCo, and they have several years of experience working in this space. I'll take a brief moment to introduce the two of them. Our first guest is Silvana Dimitrov. She's partner and RGM Practice Lead here at MathCo. Silvana has 20 years of working experience in both B2B as well as CPG companies across different geographies and functions. She has held both market and regional RGM lead roles in Africa and Asia. Silvana has also successfully set up and led RGM for Carlsberg Asia and led the implementation of the Carlsberg Analytics platform. Recognized as a leading expert in this space, she's a regular speaker at RGM conferences. The next speaker is Aditya Durai, Principal and RGM Solutions Lead. Aditya has close to a decade of industry expertise in designing and executing organization-wide data or digital strategies for multiple Fortune 500 companies across retail, CPG, finance, and manufacturing. Aditya works on the solution side of things here at MathCo, responsible for delivering flawless solutions to a portfolio of multinational industry giants. They're joining us today from Amsterdam and Chennai. Let's dive into the conversation. Hi Silvana, hi Aditya. Thank you so much for joining Coefficient. This is episode 5, and today we're talking about revenue growth management, which is such an important topic for all companies, right? And especially in the CPG industry. So I have a few questions for both of you because you're sort of specialists in the space and you've been working in the space for a while. So let's get started. The first question I have is for you, Silvana. You've worked in this space for a really long time, and I'm sure you've worked with so many companies. While everyone must have some kind of an RGM solution in place, I'm guessing that some are less desirable and maybe some are a little bit more upgraded and effective, if I can use those words. So I wanted you to maybe take us through the different maturity levels that you can see in RGM, and how can companies sort of figure out where they stand.
Hi, Nirupama, and firstly, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you about RGM, which is a favorite topic of mine. When it comes to data and analytics in RGM, we're still playing catch up in terms of where RGM is actually in terms of maturity. And what we're seeing across the board is about probably 4 different levels of maturity where the CPG companies are operating today. The first phase of maturity is what we call the experimental phase. And that's where companies are still trying things out. We're talking about quick and dirty solutions to capture the low-hanging fruits. Companies are still operating largely in manual spreadsheets. There's no tools, or there's manual tools. And we're not making fact-based decisions. So there's still a lot of reliance on past experience in terms of future decision-making. Then the next phase that we see in terms of maturity is the tactical phase. That's where we have identified now some key processes where RGM needs to be plugged in. There are key markets that we want to support, and those are being powered by analytics. And we're seeing some advanced analytics coming into play, data partnerships for key markets, and again, key processes. Those are typically standalone off-the-shelf solutions. And that's where we start to see companies developing what we call Frankensteins, so solutions that typically die off at some point. And often markets are actually left on their own to choose the solutions they need to have for their own needs. And it's very difficult to scale those across different markets at a point in the future. The next phase that we do see companies operating at is the functional level of maturity, where now the entire RGM function is actually supported by data-driven applications. However, those still tend to be a more standalone apps, so they're not connected. So we're not connecting insights and the data coming out of those applications. And we still have poor economies of scale. And because those are typically off-the-shelf solutions, there's lower adoption, because at some point markets realize that the off-the-shelf solutions are actually not really meeting their needs in terms of supporting key processes and answering key business questions, and there's lower adoption. And the final, most advanced stage that I would say is where we see more integral, the integral phase, where we're seeing companies starting to scale globally. Applications are connected. They're talking to each other. We're talking about data and insights and applications talking to each other. And also RGM is connected to other functions. And my favorite example here is actually with one CPG company that has connected RGM data and applications with supply chain data and applications. And before they plan a promo event, they actually have a look at what is out of stock and what SKUs are en route to the store. And then they plan promotions accordingly, not to disappoint the shopper experience. So those are probably, I would say, the 4 levels of maturity. And we do see companies operating across all 4. And there are some examples of companies actually being in the most advanced stage.
Right. Thank you so much for taking us through that. Actually, before we go further, I have a really basic question. Usually when I've heard about RGM, right, like when we've had discussions about revenue growth management, it's been largely about CPG companies, consumer packaged goods industry. So is it just applicable for these companies, or is it also something that's applicable to other industries as well?
RGM probably started with the airline industry. They invented RGM. The hospitality industry, they're a lot more advanced when it comes to RGM. So it's not just CPG. Retailers, also B2B companies are starting to use a lot of RGM, dynamic pricing, management of discounts. So it's not just limited to CPG companies.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to the next question, which is a question that I have for you, Aditya. We have gotten a context of the different maturity levels that companies can fall into when we think about RGM. And, it's obvious that the last level is where everybody should, try and get, because it's the most effective. So let's talk about what we mean by digitizing RGM, which is a word that we use a lot, which is the modern approach to RGM. So could you sort of paint a vision of what this ideal digitized RGM suite would look like?
Sure. It's a very interesting question. And the reason why it's so interesting is because there are so many versions of what a digital RGM could really mean that is there in the market. And the reason why so many versions exist is because of what Silvana mentioned previously, which is different markets, different organizations have different levels of maturity. And over the period of time, I think we've struggled to put one good indicator to say that this is what an ideal digital RGM would look like. But over the last few years, we are getting much closer to what the answer could look like. And there are a lot more leading indicators to tell us what a good RGM, digital RGM suite would potentially look like. Some of them are, let's say, some of the questions that organizations can answer to, get to this point is that how many of their business processes are truly powered by RGM solutions, which are more digital in nature. We have the tendency to look at pricing. We have the tendency to look at promotions, assortment as individual levers. But what drives value is really the business process. So how many of these processes are powered by RGM applications is like a good indicator of how digital it is for a given ecosystem or like a set of customers. So that's one indicator. Another indicator is how much or how nuanced are their solutions with respect to maximizing the value that they get out of the data that they have. Many years back, we had like, let's say, I mean, a good example is that many years back, we used to do assortment planning to maximize sales. But over the last few years, we've had so many organizations, making panel data available, helping us get sharper insights. So it gives us opportunities to also think about assortment planning to improve market share, to improve household penetration in a more holistic manner. Usually, it's a thought that we do as a part of innovation, but now it can be a more holistic decision that can be made as a part of assortment planning. Now the data is available. Not all organizations will have it, but the organizations that have it, are they thinking about it as a separate shopper insights or an analysis, or are they thinking about it as integrating it into their RGM levers and applications? So that's another good indicator of how these levers in itself can get maximized. But we've seen some good examples, and we are on a journey of where some of these things can get really mature to make holistic organizational decisions. In some mature markets, let's say like US, we're also working on embracing some of the connectedness associated with these processes. The example that Silvana spoke about, where some of the choices that you make as a part of RGM will have a downstream impact on certain things like supply chain. Or for that matter, what you do as a pricing decision will also have to be thought through well of as a promo strategy or an assortment strategy. So how do you build applications? How do you connect the data? How do you maximize on your infrastructure to embrace this connectedness within this ecosystem is also what like a good example of an ideal digital RGM suite could potentially look like.
Right. So what I'm understanding is that, again, right, like I think the term that was used for the most advanced version was integrated. That is, it reveals, what is the aim here. It's a very, it tells a lot. So it's not just about individual apps that may form a part of, like specific levers, but all of them sort of coming together. That is what like an ideal RGM suite looks like, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So the next question I want to ask is to you, Silvana. So to me it looks like this is a journey, right? It like obviously not like it's not like a company today wants to go from using traditional RGM methodology and suddenly makes a shift. So does this journey look the same for all kinds of companies? And if not, what are some of the key success criteria that as business leaders, people can look for?
That's a good question. Thanks, Nirupama. So the journey really varies in terms of where you are on the maturity curve and also depending on the industries that you operate in. So what you're finding is that CPG companies are largely behind when it comes to digitization. So retail is leading the pack, insurance is leading the pack, high-tech industries, banking are basically leading the pack when it comes to digitizing RGM. And what we have seen as success criteria, what works, what is basically going to set you up for success is, first of all, is access to data. So a lot of companies need to start closing the data gaps that they have. The second thing is, what do you do with this data? So do we have access to insights at shopper level, consumer level? What is happening with the competition? And what are we doing with those insights? So it's a lot about actionable insights. And a lot of companies today are struggling with turning insights into actionable insights. And that's where Gen AI starts to come in handy, because it's actually, we're able to work with large data sets and turn those into actionable insights in a quick way, as opposed to people going through screens or charts and actually having to find the root cause of actually what is the problem, if there's a dip in revenue, for example. The third criteria that sets you up for success is the type of technology that companies are using. Are we starting to access advanced analytics or not? And also, are we starting to tailor our price and promo strategies? So some of the organizations that we work with are starting to tailor the assortment plans at a store level. So we designing store level assortment planograms as opposed to start working still at a channel level or not working at all, which is where some companies are still. And the example that we gave earlier around integrating with other functions is very important, because RGM is not a standalone function within the business, and that's where the digitizing RGM has to be able to connect RGM to other functions in the business. And the last criteria for success is probably has to do more with the organization design. So where we have a hybrid design, that means we have a center of excellence, which is setting the standards, the methodology, the consistent language that a company uses, and then having the RGM analytics function sitting within the business, closer to the market, closer to the grassroots, closer to what is happening on the ground, and those working together. Those are some of the success criteria that we see work well.
So just to be clear, the hybrid model is a better way to do it?
Yes, the hybrid model is a better way, because you can actually you can design the strategies and then implement them in a very integrated way.
Right. Actually, the previous episode we had in Coefficient was about generative AI, and we were talking about what are the different ways in which it can be used in an enterprise, and it's really interesting that in just the next episode we're talking about how to improve RGM, and generative AI has an application here, and taking it from just having data to just having data that's converted into maybe dashboards to now maybe having like generative AI just like conversationally giving you those insights, right?
Yeah, and it's a natural journey in Nirupama, because we see in companies, whether you want to implement just standalone apps or you want to start moving towards connected systems in terms of having your apps talk to each other, and you're leveraging insights from everything, and then you start thinking about innovation. So Gen AI is basically providing that next step on the natural RGM journey.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So I have a follow-up question, to you, Silvana, on this. You've spoken about the journey and how to sort of how to figure out, how to measure success. What are the criteria for success? But what could be the pitfalls that companies should be aware of and try to avoid on this journey?
Yeah, so I spoke about data, and data being one of the criteria for success. But that's where companies start get paralyzed in terms of not having the perfect data, and they wait until they have the perfect data. And we often use data as an excuse of not to get going. We would just say we don't have data. So my suggestion here is do not wait until you have the perfect data, because you're never going to have the perfect data. Start small and then build from there, because only once you start building, you realize what else you need, and that's how you start closing the data gaps. But the companies that have done RGM digitization successfully have actually invested in getting the right data upfront. Some of the next pitfall to avoid is think about economies of scale from the beginning. So do not think about companies start with a market or two markets, and they're thinking about the most advanced markets. They would get an off-the-shelf solution, and then they're not thinking about scaling. So you need to think about scaling right up front when you actually start designing the RGM digital journey, or the type of applications that the business needs to have to support RGM. The third pitfall that I would urge for companies to avoid is basically you need to find the right balance between customization and standardization. And it's the right balance, because an off-the-shelf solution would be 100% standardized, but then you're going to struggle with adoption. Whereas if you go too far the other way in terms of customization, you're not going to have consistency within the business. And that's where you also end up with what we spoke about, the Frankensteins early on. The fourth suggestion will be to think about the market archetypes early on. So start with the more advanced markets, but think about what are the different market archetypes actually need, and what is the level of talent, what is the level of tools that we have, what is the readiness of a certain market in terms of implementing digital tools. And then also, do not get stuck in the prioritization of use cases. So sometimes this can be actually analysis paralysis, where decision-making gets paralyzed because we cannot decide what is more important. Use certain criteria, weight them in terms of what's important to the organization, whether it's strategic fit, whether it's value, whether it's customization, standardization, ability to scale, and make a decision on that prioritization. Do not leave it until basically you're just going around in circles.
Wow, I think that was a lot of points well packaged in such a short answer. Yeah, like I can understand a lot more about the topic already. So let's get going with the conversation. The next question is for you, Aditya. So I'm curious to know what kind of problems, MathCo, we are solving today in this space, and how we are adding value to clients.
Sure. So the good part about our set of engagements is that we work with some of the major CPG organizations in the world today. And the second is also that in a lot of these engagements and builds that we do, we work across multiple markets. So that gives us like a gamut of problems to solve, and each of them creating value in very different ways. So we do build solutions across all the pillars of RGM, like assortment planning, distribution planning, pricing, promotion, so on and so forth. But more importantly, the value we create and how we do this for each of these markets and CPG organizations are slightly different. I'd broadly classify it maybe into three parts. The first one are probably markets and organizations which are on the lower side of the maturity curve, and that goes back to what Silvana was talking about before, where instead of giving data as a reason, get started. You don't have to do store level assortment planning, but create a plan, like have a central strategy. Like that's one part of it. You don't have to know, let's say as many details of how do I understand the elasticity of a new product that I'm going to launch, but at least start with understanding elasticities of your own products and competitive products, because that data might be available to you. You might not have data in one market extensively, but learn from some of the other markets to at least take learnings, let's say in similar markets, situations, product groups, launches, so on and so forth. So getting them started on that journey with smaller implementations, more focused on getting answers and implementing it in the market, and making sure that like decisions are made. So that's one part of solutions that we do. And all the insights that are generated are directly creating business value because they're all decisions which in turn reflect in business value. Then there are second type where markets which have existing solutions. There are certain products that they've bought. There are certain things that they've already used to running. Like if you look at some of the major organizations and some of the major markets, there's no way that they're not doing RGMs, but they will definitely have certain inefficiencies or certain lack of capabilities that is stopping them from answering certain business questions. If you look at TPO for that matter, the decision probably is that I would like to go to the understanding of which store do I offer this on the aisle, or do I keep it at the front of, let's say, the store as an offer. Each of them will drive different results with respect to promotional patterns. But can I get to this level of granularity? Maybe not all TPO solutions that they've bought off the shelf will be able to do them. There's a customization that they would require. So how do you make sure that some of these solutions that they have are padded with more enhanced capabilities? And how do you make sure that the digitizing, that part that I spoke about, where all their business processes are powered by custom applications that are retaining the context of that organization and their RGM world. So that's the second type of value that we create, where most of their business processes are run by these kind of applications, and all of them powered by data and insights. Keeping their organizational context in mind. The third one is more about global programs, global scaling, keeping the context of individual markets in mind. The value there that we bring in is the same point that Silvana brought up, which is when you start small, don't lose the sight of how it will look like when you make it a global program and make sure that all markets are using it. Because if what you build in some of the major markets is going to cost us much to replicate in some of the smaller markets, then the value of the solution is not justified. And usually that entire initiative gets canned. So how do you build solutions in a more modular way? You pick up a few markets to pilot it, make sure that you interview as many people as possible, make sure that you build a solution that's more holistic, find a right balance between modularity and customization, so that one, you keep the organizational context standard across all markets, but you also keep into account some of the data, maybe, availability and unavailability within each of these markets, and tailor those solutions for those markets at a much lesser cost, so that it's an entire global RGM practice as opposed to localized individual markets that they're doing. And how do you measure RGM is really like how do you measure each of these things as value, is fundamentally that if truly an organization is growing and all of those are powered by these applications, I think that's where we take a lot of pride in, where all of these are multi-year programs where at the beginning of the year we commit to creating certain growth because of certain applications and capabilities that we do, and we measure how much of that is created over a period of time. And that's what we take a lot of pride in as people who build these solutions and also drive adoption of these solutions within the client organization.
Right. So, I was actually going to ask you, these sound like extremely complicated, long projects, and you sort of answered that saying that it's like multi-year, or year-long projects. So, maybe companies are already in some stage, right? Like to begin with, nobody is like not ever started it. So, so we sort of get in and figure out what is the boost they need to get to the next stage. And
Correct. And there is a good balance there as well, which is that like in this market driven by inflation, you are not waiting to solve the multi-year problem. You are looking to react to the situation as fast as you can. So in those kind of scenarios and situations, you need quick and dirty analysis. You need a lot more agility in how you respond, and that might not fit with your global philosophy of how you want to do it in a multi-year plan. So our ability to pivot, our ability to be very agile and nimble, and look at these as two different aspects. Continue to work on your long-term strategy, continue to work on your long-term global solution, but keep in mind that there are certain needs that you cannot skip. Maybe they are quick turnarounds, they are 2 months, 3 months, short burns that you have to do to make sure that you're running the business in the most appropriate way is very critical as you think about multi-year programs as well.
Right. So, like, as a follow-up to this, I want to ask you, what do you think lies ahead? And, how do you see this field evolving?
So, one thing that we're already visibly seeing is a lot more organizations are embracing the idea of connected systems and, making all of these interactions between apps, business processes, data, infrastructure, all of them. And they are seeing the benefits of this. So that's one big trend that we're definitely seeing, where more and more organizations are beginning to adopt it. But what I'm most excited about is, how some of these newer technologies, let's say like generative AI, can truly impact some of these fields. The traditional, or not the traditional, but the conventional way of thinking about generative AI is also that it probably might end up being an efficiency gain, because some of these things can be automated and your questions can get answered faster than what it used to be. But I think the potential is much beyond that. That's probably a starting point. That's probably more foundational in nature. But there is a lot more potential in some of these, avenues if you explore deeply. A few examples that I can think about is that today the richness of data. I mean, we don't have a data limitation problem in CPG anymore. We used to have that, but right now some of that is getting solved with different dimensions of data that is coming in. With that dimensionality of data increasing, there is merit in thinking of like having crawlers which come and tell you that a new product has been introduced 3 months back locally in one region, or let's say one set of stores, and that's eating away quite a bit of like market share. We need to constantly understand if, let's say, that's a temporary trend based event, or is it something that is going to stay on for the longer run. So which means we probably have to think about an NPD or let's say strategy around that. So that's something that probably organizations take a lot more time to catch, but let's say a generative AI engine that's running in the background can pick it up and share this with us as an insight. So that's one part of it. There is another part of it which is also a lot more associated with providing recommendations and following through on actions, where TPO systems, I think as things stand today, I mean, the most mature systems probably recommend a promo plan for the next 52 weeks. But if you integrate generative AI components to it and attach workflows to it, can you think about recommendations? Can you think about what shortcomings of those things could potentially look like? Because any recommendation will have its own advantage and disadvantage, right? Like, what are the pros and cons? Synthesis of those recommendations. And even for that matter, once approved, can it go through a round of implementations, measurements almost automatically, like how most analysts would even do for that matter. So those are all avenues and opportunities that I'm looking forward to unlocking when we think about generative AI in itself as what it can add value to RGM. So it will unlock value or avenues of RGM that we have not explored as such right now, because we've always been limited by data applicability, and like, can we really do this kind of things, which I think is a barrier that generative AI will unlock for us.
Another example that I wanted to bring into Aditya's examples is we're busy developing a pricing co-pilot in one of our pricing apps. And that's basically almost like having another person making pricing decisions and recommendations together with you. But it's basically leveraging AI in terms of the ability to work with large data and coming up much quicker with recommendations. So thanks, Aditya, for that.
Okay, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time, Silvana and Aditya. I think this is a much bigger topic, and perhaps down the line we'll have another follow-up conversation in a few months and see how some of these things have evolved. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting us, Nirupama. It was very exciting to talk to you about this topic. Both Silvana and I are very passionate about this, so very excited about doing this and looking forward to our future conversations as well.
Yes, same. Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Coefficient. If you want to know more about how to upgrade your RGM suite, get in touch with us in the email ID listed in the description. If you like this episode, please do give us a rating or a review based on wherever you get your podcasts. And do subscribe or follow the show to get notified whenever we release a new episode. Until then, have a good day. Goodbye.